This show, that's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. It's been a busy conference day here, but before anything else, we'll be debating how we restore conservatism and prosperity in this, our great nation. And of course, conservatism and prosperity go hand in glove. But at a time like this, at a Tory party conference with a general election next year, we owe it to voters to remind them what it means to be a Tory and what it takes to restore full-blooded conservatism. Well, speaking of conservatism, the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, addressed the conference today and announced the following.
I know as Conservatives, we know what a woman is. And I know the vast majority of NHS staff and patients do too.
Gender-neutral language is set to be removed from the NHS constitution, and female-only wards will be for women only. Some bold announcements from Mr Barclay, but will it cut the mustard? The doctors are on strike yet again for a debilitating 72 hours. In fact, they've even set up shop just a few short yards from here. There was even someone dressed as a badger, protesting against, I can only assume, badger culling. But while the display is laughable, the consequences are dire for the British public. Hundreds of thousands of appointments have already been cancelled, and many more will be cancelled in addition. Plus, how do you have your steak? Medium rare, well done, or hormone-treated? Well, a remark about hormone-treated Australian beef seems to have upset the protectionist racket of the National Farmers Union, and it's been suggested I ought to be deported. State of the Nation starts now. Defiantly holding the State of the Nation flabellum tonight is the irascible journalist, author and broadcaster Michael Crick. As always, I want to hear from you. It's a crucial part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now it's what we've been waiting for, the news of the day, with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, the top story tonight, the Home Secretary has warned of a future hurricane of mass migration into the UK in her speech at the Tory party conference in Manchester today. Suella Braverman said that as well as stopping illegal migrants from coming to the UK, she promises to make sure that legal migration is held at reasonable levels. GB News presenter Nigel Farage criticised the speech, though, saying the government was out of touch with ordinary voters. But Miss Braverman said the Conservative Party will do whatever it takes to deter the boats.
A Legal Migration Act, which will come into force in the coming months, now means that the only route to asylum in the UK is a legal route. The Act means that those arriving illegally will be detained and removed back to their home country if possible, or to a safe third country like Rwanda. But all of this is ultimately a question of political will. And be under no illusion, we will do whatever it takes to stop the boats and deter bogus asylum seekers.
Meanwhile, the Prime Minister has told GB News today he's the person to deliver change to Britain. Rishi Sunak defended his record on illegal migration, saying for the first time ever the number of small boats crossing the English Channel from France was down by a fifth. He also reiterated his plan to halve inflation and accused the Labour leader of being light on policy.
You've got Keir Starmer, who, no one knows what he stands for, flip-flops left and right. The country can see through that. That's not leadership. What I'm offering is different. I know people want change. I'm the person to deliver it because we're going to do politics differently. You saw that on net zero. You'll see that this week. That's what you get from a Conservative government.
Well, the Prime Minister is expected to confirm in his Conservative Party speech tomorrow exactly what his position is on the future of the northern section of the HS2 rail project. Businesses are said to be demanding immediate clarity following reports Rishi Sunak may be planning to scrap the line from Birmingham to Manchester. It's understood the Prime Minister will announce spending on other infrastructure projects for the north in his forthcoming speech tomorrow. Now, some news reaching us in the last hour. Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been dismissive of disaster the UK COVID-19 inquiry's been hearing. The Bereaved Families for Justice group says there was a leadership void in the early days of the crisis, and they went on to accuse Mr Johnson of cavalier public messaging just weeks before the lockdown. The inquiry also heard that key WhatsApp messages by the then Prime Minister are unrecoverable. The Prince and Princess of Wales have been in Cardiff today in Wales to meet members of the Windrush generation. Prince William and Princess Catherine greeted Windrush veterans and descendants during their visit, marking the start of Black History Month. They met with Windrush organisations at the Grange Pavilion Community Centre to hear about their contribution to the Welsh community. And the couple, notoriously competitive as they are, joined members of the Youth Forum for a quick game of table tennis as well. You're with GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and now on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Today, earlier on, we were discussing at the Legatum Institute what it means to be a Conservative and how, as a Conservative, you should restore prosperity. And it's basically about going back to first principles. Conservatives believe in the individual as opposed to the collective. That is to say, the idea that power, authority, prosperity comes from the actions of individuals coming together and doing things through their family, then through a community, then to the state, creating an overall society. This is in contradistinction to the socialist who believes that the collective is what you should worry about and that the collective as a whole can have the individual fit in with what it sees as being best for the collective. Now, we have built up a constitution, to my mind, based on conservative principles of freedom. You see them in the Magna Carta. You see them in the 1297 Act of Tallage. You see them in the Bill of Rights, that we are a society that has put the state under the law rather than having the state as above the law, which is very much more the constitutional model on the continent. So, John Fortescue in the 15th century was able to say that the King of England was under the law, whereas the King of France was the law. And you see this in later centuries with Louis XIV able to say, the state is me. And you continue to see it in our different constitution practices today. What are the pillars of our constitution? Well, they're fourfold. They are democracy, and a democracy of great antiquity. The right of Parliament to vote on taxation dates back to 1297. The rule of law. That's not the same as the rule of lawyers, but it is the common law and the law passed by Parliament. The rights of property. Your property can only be taken from you by a proper process, and taxation, which is confiscation of property, again requires Parliament. And the freedom of speech, obviously including the freedom of the press. This is so fundamentally important because it is the freedom of speech that exposes corruption and abuses, and you need that to make democracy work, because if you don't know what's going on, how can you vote about it? And this is tied in with the conservative belief that society is built up from the individual. And it makes a more prosperous society because the individual spends his or her money better than the state can spend it for him. Why do I say that? Well, when you spend your money, you decide what's the interest of you and your family. When the state does it, it has to go through a whole complex process to ensure that it isn't being spent improperly. And that creates massive inefficiencies, and it's spent not necessarily for good investment reasons, but for political reasons. When the state is competitive with the individual and competitive with that first building block, the family, the state has always worried that the family is something that is as strong as it is, and therefore looks to control it, particularly the socialist state. That has always been the worry for those of us who think that the individual counts and that we need strong families as well. So that's what we were talking about this morning at Legat, and we were talking about how you create this prosperous state built on individuals working for themselves and for their families, the Adam Smith view that the baker doesn't bake bread out of the goodness of his heart but to make money, but that the bread he sells makes you better off, more comfortable, feeds you, feeds your family, and that these basic principles are what this conference needs to make us an even more successful nation, and to have a clear distinction between us and the controlling, overriding, bossy, nannying socialist. As always, I want to hear from you. Don't forget to let me know your thoughts. You know the email off by heart by now. It's mailmog@gbnews.com. But I'm very pleased to be joined now by the great flabellum holder, the journalist and author, Michael Craig. Michael, do you accept that prosperity comes more from conservative principles based on the individual than it does from socialist principles?
No, I don't necessarily. And I think that actually this distinction you make between the socialists believing in the collective and conservatives being in the individual is incredibly, well, it's just not an accurate picture. I mean, the Second World War was a collective effort by this country to defeat the Nazis, a very successful one, an example of how the collective can often work much better than the sums of individuals. If we were to say, okay, well, we're going to get rid of schools in this country, and from now on all parents have to find a way of educating their children for themselves, it would be chaotic. People would be badly educated. Some people would be well educated. People like yourself, no doubt, could afford an army of tutors. But most of the population couldn't. So Conservatives have accepted the collective in all sorts of areas of life: the health service, education, defence, the police, and it is, you know, some of those to which you really held dear, defence and the police.
But what I was actually saying was that society is built up. This back to Margaret Thatcher's comment. There's no such thing as society. They're individuals and their families. It's how is society constructed? Is it built bottom up, and that individuals come together and they cooperate and they create family, community, and state? Or is it the state that is authoritative and then directs downwards? And
well, I would agree that ideally it should come from the bottom up, but occasionally the state has to intervene and said, hang on a moment, we can't wait for it to build from the bottom up. We've got to take action here. I mean, for instance, the state, something I believe strongly in and you don't, taking firm action on net zero, 2050, passing new laws and all of that. We couldn't wait for individuals to say, this is quite a good idea.
Here I completely disagree with you.
Yes.
That I think if we are to get to net zero, it has to be done in a way that individuals buy into it rather than penalised and bullied.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the state has got to persuade people to go along in the same way that
the state, got to be competitive and affordable.
The state persuaded people that they ought to send their children to school. And there's not many, actually, it's probably more now than there have been for a very long time, but over the 150 years or so of compulsory state education, everybody's gone along with that, partly because it's personally convenient to them.
People wanted to send their children to school.
Exactly.
And that schools built up, and there were voluntary schools before the state then made it something it encouraged and paid for, and then something that was compulsory. But if you take the lockdown, which was the top-down state that stopped children going to school, that has very bad and damaging effects.
Well,
and children are not going
It was
back to
decided
school, no.
during lockdown that COVID was so dangerous, and indeed thousands of people were dying every day at one point, that the state had to take strong action, curtail people's liberties. Now, I happen to believe, and you certainly believe, that it went too far. But that's only in my case, in hindsight, and I now realise. But I mean, it could have been, it could have been a lot worse. We didn't know at the time how bad it was going to be.
I thought
and it was Conservatives, after all, who made these decisions.
It was. Not all Conservative decisions are right.
And indeed, your hero, Boris Johnson, as Prime Minister.
Even Homer nods. But if you take the final winter of COVID, the winter 2020-21, when there wasn't a lockdown, people of their own volition cancelled their Christmas parties and so on. And I think you can trust people to do things for themselves much better than this top-down approach, which had terrible consequences, and that we should learn from that. And actually, the Labour Party is always keen to control people in every area. It's what it exists to do.
Well, I think that's a caricature of the modern Labour Party. It may have been truer in 1945, when, after all, we'd just come through the greatest collective effort we'd ever seen under a Conservative Prime Minister, not a Conservative government, of course, and that was the mood of the times, and it was very successful in the Attlee government.
You get a bit romantic about the collective effort. I'd be a bit, because wasn't 1941 the highest year of strikes in the mines in our history?
That is true, actually, I think, yes. Yeah. But things have moved on, and I don't think the modern Labour Party is especially collective anymore. In fact, some people would argue they wish it was.
Talking of modern parties...
But yeah, it's gone.
Do you think people who heckle at political events should be thrown out of the
I certainly
arena?
Don't. And Andrew Boff, you're talking about...
Andrew Boff, can we?
Yes.
I think we can, being thrown out. Or perhaps we can't. No, we can't apparently show him being thrown out.
And actually, I think there's a growing intolerance about your party right now, because you saw that today. I mean, after all, what did he say? That there is no such thing as trans ideology in response to Suella Braverman.
They do it to some old man who heckled Tony Blair and arrested him on anti-terrorism charges, and that this is always a mistake. That you should be really calm about heckling.
And actually, heckling has always been a good part of politics. You must have been heckled and enjoyed it.
You've
probably heckled yourself occasionally. Michael Heseltine used to get his mates to heckle him deliberately at the back, without pointing out they were his mates, but he said, don't tell me what you're going to heckle me, because it'll make me look good.
Yeah, heckling really helps.
And there was another incident yesterday with Steve Bray, the guy with the blue hat, the pro-Remainer.
Only too well.
Right, he was manhandled out of the Bruges group for asking a question along the lines of, so what are the benefits of Brexit then? Where are they? Perfectly legitimate question. Even the Bruges group should have been able to answer that. So I do think there is a bit of an intolerance about it at the moment, and you see it also with Priti Patel. You said that freedom of the press was important. Priti Patel making a speech, attacking the BBC, talking about fake news in the BBC. This is Trump language. Now, I know you were a supporter of Trump at one point. I'm not sure whether you still are. But I think that one of the aspects of the modern Conservative Party, which is very non-conservative, really, there is a lack of generosity, a lack of kindness, a lack of compassion, Christian values, if you like, and, of course, Christianity was an important component of your party's philosophy.
I haven't seen what Priti has called fake news. But all newscasters sometimes make mistakes. So
but fake news implies it's deliberate, that you've actually, it's fake. We've made mistakes. You must have made mistakes. You come from a newspaper family yourself. Yeah, but that's not fake news. Fake news is where you deliberately put out something out there you know to be wrong, probably for political purposes. Now, I think if you were trying to find examples of the BBC doing that, I think you'd really struggle. And for the former Home Secretary to come out with remarks like that is an intolerant, and actually it's undermining one of our great institutions. As a Conservative, I would have thought you would be a believer in the BBC. But do you want to bring it down?
I think the BBC should be privatised and the licence is unjustifiable. But unfortunately, we've got to move on before having that discussion. Thank you, Michael. Don't forget to let me know what you think. mailmog@gbnews.com. After the messages from our generous sponsors, I'll be asking why the NHS has been trying to counsel women. Plus, do you like your beef hormone-treated yum-yum?
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts, which I have electronically for you today via the miracle of WhatsApp. Philip says, "Hi, Sir Jacob. If Steve Barclay is serious, capital S, about stopping woke and gender ideology, the NHS needs to stop employing diversity and gender/woke employees. It wastes time making red tape and costing billions. People go to the NHS to be treated, not to be preached at." Well, I worked very closely with Steve Barclay in one of my ministerial roles, and he is one of the most serious and effective ministers in the government. John asks, JRM, has working on GB News given you a better insight and understanding of how the public views the current Conservative Party? To which the answer is yes, not least thanks to the Mail Mog, so please keep them coming in. You are at least keeping me properly informed. Thank you. Earlier today, the Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, announced at this conference that plans are in place effectively to ban trans women from female hospital wards. Mr. Barclay told delegates the NHS's constitution will be altered later this year to recognise the importance of different biological needs and protect the rights of women, meaning gender-segregated wards will only have patients of the specified biological sex, as well as ensuring that requests for same-sex carers will be respected. The past few years have seen many NHS documents all but erase references to women from information regarding female-specific issues such as pregnancy and cervical cancer. Some terms used include, quote, birthing parent, or mother, as we might say, and person of childbearing potential. I'll give you a much easier way to say that: it's a woman. Why has our National Health Service been so intent on erasing women? The Health Secretary made the announcement after declaring, "I know as Conservatives we know what a woman is, and I know the vast majority of hard-working NHS staff and patients do too." Let's take a look at what he had to say.
This is why I ordered a reversal of unacceptable changes to the NHS website that erased references to women for conditions such as cervical cancer, and stopped the NHS ordering staff to declare pronouns to each new patient. And that is why today I am going further by announcing that we will change the NHS constitution following a consultation later this year to make sure we respect the privacy, dignity and safety of all patients, recognise the importance of different biological needs and protect the rights of women.
Miriam, isn't it simply odd that the NHS has done this as a publicly funded body, has tried to take women out of its documents, out of what you might call a narrative?
Well, it's odd, it's wrong, it's disturbing, it's a waste of money, and also obviously it's created a lot of fear and anxiety amongst women. I hear from women, especially older women, who know they've got to go into hospital and think that they may end up having a man on their ward, and that that's quite worrying. But I think unfortunately the Equality Act has this duty in it, this public sector equality duty, that almost compels our institutions to act in this way. And although I'm really appreciative of what Steve Barclay's done today, I think it's absolutely the right thing. Common sense thing to do. It's the right safeguarding thing to do. Ultimately, the government will be playing whack-a-mole with these policies unless we get rid of this public sector equality duty that is kind of weaponising these activist groups within our public sector institutions.
Particularly in the use of language, that saying birthing parent rather than mother is an abuse of language, isn't it? It doesn't make sense to most people.
That's right. It's trying to change language away from what ordinary people know that it means and it's meant for centuries. And that's what's so worrying about it. And I think it also diminishes people's confidence in the NHS. I've got a friend who took a friend of hers to a medical appointment in a hospital, and she overheard the gentleman in his 70s who's sitting next to her being asked by the nurse if he might be pregnant. Now, you can lie. I mean, it's ridiculous, but it also undermines your faith in the NHS as an evidence-based institution with competent clinicians.
Michael, this is a sensitive issue because one doesn't want to be unfair to transgender people. On the other hand, if somebody decides that they are a woman on the morning they go into hospital, that person clearly shouldn't go into a woman's ward.
Well, I mean, I can't defend any of the things that go on in the NHS in terms of the language you've been talking about there. I think this is the much more delicate issue. I think Steve Barclay is going too far here, and it's not clear to me whether he's definitely doing this. I mean, he said in that clip there he was going to do it after a consultation. Well, what's the point of the consultation if he's definitely going to do it? But I think that you'd have to ask a number of questions here. I mean, have there actually been any incidents where, I mean, you may know about this and you may be able to answer, many incidents where there have been, say, sexual assaults on women by trans women in hospitals? I mean, we know about them in prisons, but in prisons they tend to be full of people who are either violent or dishonest. And,
yes.
It may be more understandable. Whereas in hospitals, these are people who are ill, and the presumption must be that they are honest, decent people going into hospitals. And I think that the distress that is likely to be caused, quite apart from the inconvenience to the health service, I mean, where are they going to treat trans women otherwise? They're going to put them in private wards, single cubicle wards. I think this is going too far, and I think it's basically a dog whistle policy to rustle up votes.
Miriam, would you draw the line, or do you think there is a line to be drawn, that somebody who has had an operation who was a man, ought to be on a women's ward? Or would you say that even somebody who'd had an operation and fully transitioned, if that's the right term, should still be in a separate ward?
I think the use of private wards would be the right way to go. And I think I don't like to play the gender card here, but I think as a woman, you have an evolved instinct to be wary of men you don't know. And that's a survival instinct. It's what's kept us safe for generations. And I think it's very difficult for men to understand what women feel like when they're in a situation where they're not in control and where there are men who are physically stronger in almost every single case are there. Now, that's not to say that every trans woman or even the majority of trans women are there for malicious purposes, but the fear that you feel as a woman, and I certainly know older women feel, knowing that there could be someone who is male on their ward, is very, very real. And the loss of dignity, especially in a very vulnerable position, some people won't be able to get out of bed, the loss of dignity is very significant, and I think that's why hospital wards are so significant.
I still haven't heard as to whether there actually
There have been, yes.
How many?
I don't know numbers, but even one is too many.
Well, I think one is probably not too many for a radical change in policy like this. And I think that it is insulting to trans women that this should happen. And these are people who have often gone through a lot of stress in transitioning like this.
But Michael, nobody's saying that they shouldn't have care. Absolutely, they should have health care. But the important thing here is to protect women's safety and dignity at the same time as protecting the.
Also, they haven't necessarily transitioned. It's at the earlier stage. So that's important.
Whether they'd had an operation or not might be a compromise in this policy.
And the carers issue, the right to choose a same-sex carer. I mean, if you're going through security as a man and somebody waves a wand over you or pats you down, I don't care whether it's a man or a woman. But I completely understand that a woman would not want to be patted down by a man. And I think doesn't that apply to intimate care in hospital as well?
Well, to be honest, it's not an issue I've thought about. But I mean, a lot of women in hospitals are treated in pregnancy by men all the time. There's a lot of intimate examinations going on.
Always with a chaperone and always with consent.
Right.
And I think the problem here is that so many women have been in wards with trans women, so people who are male, without their consent. And there have been stories of women who have been told by the nurses that they are no longer eligible for treatment because they're transphobic, because they object to having a man on the ward.
Well, unfortunately, we're going to have to draw stumps there. Yeah. But thank you, Miriam and Michael. After the break, we'll be assessing the effects of the 72-hour doctors' strike the National Health Service is currently enduring. Plus, we'll be discussing one of life's great joys, beef.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Michael, very kindly, has said, "Dear Sir Jacob, I love the way that you respond to those ad hominem barbs from the Reds. keep going. Well, I will keep going. Thank you. And Pat says, as a woman born in 1950, I had to fight hard for the rights women enjoy today. I feel that these rights are being trampled on by a group of mainly LGBT plus males who want to invade safe female spaces while they remain biologically intact men. Mixed male-female hospital wards did not work, so trans men should be on women's wards. I am pleased some MPs are now trying to safeguard women and our hard-won equality. Well, thank you very much, Pat. Eloquently put. Today, doctors have claimed they will strike until the next general election and beyond, to infinity and beyond, like Flash Gordon or whoever it is, in their dispute with the government over pay. Consultants and junior doctors started their three-day strike yesterday, many travelling all the way up to Manchester, where I'm at the Conservative Party conference, to a rally in the city. This week's strike marks the longest joint strike action of doctors in NHS history, with an estimated 2 million planned appointments and surgeries cancelled owing to the walkout, with an ever-expanding waiting list of 7.7 million. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, stated at this conference today that doctors are demanding extortionate pay rises, even if this means money is diverted from patient resources. Let's have a look at what he had to say.
The militant BMA leadership, whose strikes have resulted in countless cancelled appointments and pose a serious threat to the NHS's recovery from the pandemic. Their consultants and junior doctors committee are relentlessly demanding massive pay rises, even if that means diverting resources from patients, and despite junior doctors having already received a pay rise of up to 10.3%.
I'm now joined by the GP, Dr. David Lloyd. Dr. Lloyd, thank you for joining me. How can this strike by well-paid people be justified?
Well, like everybody else, I think we have a right to strike as doctors and nurses and other workers in the NHS because of our pay and conditions and because of the way we're treated.
But just because people have a right to strike doesn't make it right to use it, does it, when patients are suffering? What about the Hippocratic Oath, or does that count for nothing to doctors anymore?
It certainly does. I want to see doctors and nurses working in a system that gives people the best possible care. We've known what it's like.
But they're not. They're on strike.
No, but under Labour Party, when the Labour Party were in charge, we knew what it was like to have a functioning health service, and we knew what it was like to have doctors and nurses who work properly. At the moment, we're being looked after by our health secretary and by our leaders in an appalling way, and the average consultant in this country is now £42,000 a year less well off than he was 5 years ago. So it really are.
But he's still earning over £100,000 a year, isn't he? So that's just pretty greedy of the consultants.
How much do you think someone who is making life and death decisions every day, 3 or 4 times a day, who has skills that have taken many years to acquire, how much do you think he or she should earn?
Well, I think earning over £100,000 a year is a pretty good salary.
Well, how much would that a person who was of that skill working in, say, a private equity firm, how much would he or she be earning in an equivalent rank?
I'm glad you mentioned comparisons, because 1 year after graduating, somebody in medicine is earning £37,000 against the average for graduates of £22,000, more than somebody veterinary, nursing, engineering, economics, physics, etc. And after 10 years is at £56,000 against the average of £32,000. So people in the medical profession are earning more after they've graduated than people in almost all other professions.
Well, I specifically asked you about private equity. I mean, 10 years down the line,
private equity is completely irrelevant. It is completely irrelevant to this conversation. Private equity is an esoteric part of the city.
The brightest and the best coming out of schools in the old days would have thought of medicine as being quite a good career. But no longer do they think that. And the first thing they think about is, let's get into the city and earn lots of money, because that is where people are best rewarded. In the old days, you would be rewarded by work.
So you're saying doctors just go into the profession for the money, not for the vocation? I thought it was a vocation for doctors.
Yes, but you can work as hard and have a love of your profession, which I do, and I've done for the last 46 years. But you do need to be paid as well. And these poor doctors are being paid less and less and less, and they're now 26% less. Their salary is worth 26% less than it was 5 years ago, whereas someone who's worked in the financial sector, I'll widen it to the financial sector, is now 5% better off. They are being shafted.
But no individual doctor is 26% worse off. That they've got pay rises and they've got grade rises. You're talking about pay bands, but people have moved within pay bands. So this is a bogus statistic.
Consultants are 26. They've reached the top of their pay band, so they're being paid an awful lot less than they were 10 years ago. I'm sorry to talk about money when we're talking about health, but it is a package.
But these consultants are on strike because of money, aren't they? And they're abandoning their patients and waiting lists are increasing. This is an abandonment of patients, and it's shameful, of well-paid people.
It's not just about now. We're talking about the future as well. As I said, if you ask people nowadays whether they're thinking about going into medicine or not, they're rejecting medicine because they don't think. Go on.
So why are applications to medical school massively oversubscribed if everyone's rejecting medicine?
Because there aren't enough medical school places to provide the doctors we need.
But if they're oversubscribed, it's clearly not the case that people are rejecting medicine. It can't be.
No, it's because this government have said that these new medical schools that they were so proud of cannot accept UK students because they can't afford them. So they're full of foreign medical students that have come in, they're paying their whack, and they're not letting our homegrown students become doctors and nurses.
But the medical schools are full. Anyway, thank you very much, Dr. Lloyd. It's good of you to join me. Back with me now is the broadcaster and journalist, Michael Crick. Michael, thank you for staying with me. We're going to move on and talk about something else, about Lord Farage of Kent, or wherever he gets his title, or a Member of Parliament for a safe Conservative seat at the next election. What do you think about that? Well, as his biographer.
Well, it was interesting that you welcomed him in, urged him to join the party. I asked Tom Tugendhat at a Fringe meeting tonight whether he thought he would welcome Farage into the party, a traditional sort of middle-of-the-road, centrist Conservative, and he too caught perhaps unawares, because apparently there was a big kerfuffle on the One Nation WhatsApp group afterwards that Tugendhat had said this, and great disappointment that he'd welcomed Farage in. I don't think he's going to be a candidate in the next election. I don't think the current regime in Downing Street and Central Office would allow him to get onto the candidates list, which is a requirement to be a candidate in the Conservative Party. But I think if the Conservatives lose the next election, which I think you will, then and that the party moves adopts a more right-wing leader, say somebody like Suella Braverman or Priti Patel or whoever, then I think in those circumstances they probably would allow Farage onto the candidates list. I think he would be selected fairly easily, possibly even for a by-election. And then, of course, there's the prospect of what about Nigel Farage? I think there's about a 25% chance that Nigel Farage will end up leading his third party. Would you welcome him as leader of the Conservative Party?
Well, I'm supporting the leader of the party.
I know,
you
know what do you see him as a future leader of your party?
I think
you see him as a future MP.
Let's stick to having an interesting discussion without speculating about future leaders.
You can answer that question.
I'm asking the question. This is my programme, not yours.
I'm going to ask.
I know you used to be regular at asking questions, but I think you raise a very interesting.
You haven't answered it. I'm sure the viewers out there will have
I'm sure they'll be fascinated.
You obviously.
That's because I asked the questions on this programme. Look, I'm a fan of Nigel Farage. I think he has this extraordinary capacity to communicate with voters, like Boris Johnson and actually Tony Blair.
I would argue, yeah.
Possibly even more than Boris Johnson.
Yeah, but Johnson didn't actually like engaging them on the street that much. Farage loves it. He is a brilliant communicator. I accept his politics aren't mine,
but he's in his element with people, isn't he? You see this as he goes up and down the country.
In every other respect, the conference platform, the parliamentary chamber. It was Europe in his case. The television studio, the radio studio. He's a superb broadcaster in all of those respects. But whether your party could tolerate his politics and the signal that would send, and I think a significant number of people would leave your party if he had a senior position within it and was leader. And but it does open up this extraordinary prospect. And of course, where we are right now, GB News would be, his great media fan club.
Well, it's the People's Channel. It would be close to the people. But if
well, not all people are Farage supporters. That's
true.
That's why he's
that's
never
true.
been elected as an MP.
He is quite a divisive figure.
Indeed, and there are more people who dislike him up till now than have liked him, which is why in the 7 attempts to get into Parliament he's failed every time.
But do you think he should be rewarded with a peerage? Because he has been a huge figure in British public life.
Peerages are a corrupt system, and I mean, I know I ought to be congratulating you on your knighthood, but the whole thing stinks, frankly. Knighthood's less so than peerages. I mean, if he's not going to go... I mean, I suppose if they're going to be peerages, there should be...
Well, that's the point.
Well,
there are peerages.
Right, OK, on that basis, yes, but I just the whole thing is dreadful. He ought to stand for... If he's going to join your party, he ought to stand for the Commons. It would be interesting, and it would put people like you on the spot a bit, I think.
Well, I think he'd be a very good member of the Commons, and I think, again, he'd be in his element. He would love it.
You don't know whether he'd be a good leader.
Well, I'm supporting the leader that we've got, as you know. Thank you, Michael. Coming up, I've had a bit of a beef with the National Farmers Union, whose stall's just opposite me, actually.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK. Here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I continue to identify as Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch with your male Moggs. John says, UK doctors have to pass the most difficult exams in the world. They are uniquely important and should be paid accordingly. Doctors see train drivers earning more than they do. I'm not sure about that. How long does it take to learn to drive a train? 4 weeks? Good luck to the UK doctors. Well, I'd say get back to work to the UK doctors. And Mark says, Jacob, Mark, you're very kind. You always look very smart. Maybe for charity, try a single-breasted suit. come on, or C''MON. Well, I do have a single-breasted suit, which I wear very occasionally on, I suppose, not high days and holidays, but low days and very ordinary days. Anyway, yesterday, at an exciting, exotic and packed Fringe event, I made a speech about growth and taxes. And I said, I want cheaper food. I want hormone-injected beef from Australia. I've eaten beef in Australia. It's delicious. There's nothing wrong with it. Well, this has prompted outrage from the usual suspects. The president of the National Farmers Union, the protectionist organisation that it is, Minette Batters, has said that I ought to be deported for the crime of wanting cheaper food for the British public. She just wants very expensive food. But amidst all this noise, a serious matter is at stake. Brexit is an opportunity to make things cheaper for British consumers. It is within our power to make food cheaper by slashing our tariffs unilaterally. It would encourage other nations to do the same for us, but it would be good for consumers. That's the fundamental point. Good for voters and actually good for businesses, because businesses that can compete competitively grow and succeed. Ones that have protectionist barriers end up becoming slack and failing. One of the great consequences of Brexit has been our trade deal with Australia. And a man who was instrumental in that process was the former Australian High Commissioner, George Brandis. And he's joining me now, along with the Conservative MP, Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown. Well, George, first of all, thank you very much for coming in.
It's a pleasure, Jake. Very good to see you again.
Thank you. You've eaten hormone-injected beef, I imagine, in Australia.
I imagine I have.
Has it had a terrible effect on you?
It has not, but may I say, Jacob, and I completely agree with everything you said in your intro, always be suspicious of the people who call for dear food, because they are people who are against working people. The great virtue of having free trade agreements, like the terrific free trade agreement we have between Australia and the United Kingdom, is that it makes extremely good quality food more affordable for everyone. And when cost of living is a big issue, that's something we should all seek to do. Now, in relation to your rather teasing remark, Jacob, if I may say so, about hormone-injected beef, there is a little bit of beef in Australia, not much, by the way, that is hormone-injected, but none of that could ever be landed in the UK market under our free trade agreement for a very simple reason. Our food exports to the United Kingdom will always meet all UK food standards and regulations. So it is not possible that any Australian beef, delicious Australian beef, exported to the UK market would ever be hormone injected.
Geoffrey, my view is that we should have free trade and we should get rid of tariffs rapidly, and then we should label, so that if my constituents want to buy British beef or French beef or Australian beef, they'd be free to do so. What we currently have is a system that protects French beef against Australian beef, and that's just bizarre, isn't it?
So I'm with you. I think we should have free trade agreements. We do want competition, but what we don't want is a race to the bottom in terms of food quality. And as George has made quite clear, the Australians are not going to be allowed to send hormone-treated beef here. And indeed, the minister at the NFU meeting, which you caused quite a stir at last night, made it very clear that it wouldn't happen. So I think we're discussing a fig leaf, really. I don't think it'll happen. But what I do think, I just want to make this point, I think we should have some of the cheapest tariffs in the world. And actually, as a result of Brexit, some of our tariffs are now higher than the EU. And I think that's quite wrong. We should be cutting them.
It's a great mistake. We should be getting tariffs down because protectionists harms consumers and ultimately producers. But don't you have to be careful about using regulations as another trade barrier? You get rid of the tariffs, but then you find a regulatory barrier instead, which of course the EU has been very good at.
Well, I think we must avoid that. We must avoid regulatory tariffs because and they're often invented on really not very good reason. And I agree with you that what we need to do with food is to label it. So when we get this genetically modified food, which we have approved the regulation, you and I have in Parliament, actually the way to deal with that, people who don't want to buy it, label it, and they can see on the labels whether they want to buy it or not. So I am with you on that. But I just think we want to keep up relatively good quality food in this country. We've always had relatively good quality. We want to keep that going. growing.
And in terms of farmers, Australian farmers are very competitive, but so are British farmers.
Absolutely.
And good competitive farmers don't need tariffs to produce food profitably.
Absolutely right, Jack. I mean, this is a win-win, not just for consumers in both of our countries, but for farmers as well. And I know that there was, when we were negotiating the free trade agreement during my time as High Commissioner, a lot of fear, particularly from smaller British farmers. But the truth of the matter was that farmers can learn from each other's techniques. They can learn from each other's husbandry, for example. And just as consumers benefit from free trade agreements with lower prices for good quality food, so farmers benefit as well because they learn from one another.
Can I make an important point, Jacob? Everybody thinks of free trading agreements as a one-way traffic that is all going to come into this country. Actually, our farmers have a huge opportunity to export to Australia, America. We celebrated last year that the fact that the Americans had dropped the objections to British beef going into America.
And also people make a big mistake about trade, that imports are a good thing for consumers because they give them a range of goods that may be cheaper, they save them money and increase their choice. The only people who dislike imports are protectionists like Minette Batters.
Well, look, I'm very fond of Minette Batters.
I invited her on, but she was, I think she was washing her hair tonight.
We had a lot to do with each other over the last few years, but, and you know, she was protecting an interest, both literally and metaphorically. But I think the whole premise was wrong because the free trade agreement is a win-win for both countries and both farmers. And may I say too, that in Australia, where I now live, British food has a tremendously high reputation as an excellent good. So, I mean, there is a very, very eager and, pardon the pun, hungry appetite for British food.
Great pun to end on. Thank you to George and Geoffrey, who has, of course, in his constituency, a great agricultural university. Thank you very much. That's all from me. Up next, it's Mark Dolan. Mark, what is on your bill of fare this evening? You've got anything to beef about?
Well, I don't mind any kind of beef wherever it is in the world because it is about free trade. It was the big speech of the conference so far, Jacob, from Suella Braverman, but is she really serious about stopping the boats? I'll be asking the one and only Nigel Farage live on the show from Manchester shortly.
Oh, well, that all sounds very exciting. Nigel's been everywhere today, being welcomed back into the Tory party, offered up for a peerage, you name it. Nigel seems to be the man of the moment, so that'll be a great programme. It's coming up after the weather. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation, and the weather in Somerset's glorious.
Hello again, I'm Alex Burkill and here's your latest GB News weather bulletin. We have some pretty wet weather to come across northern parts through the next 24 hours, but further south it is a drier picture, and that's because of this area of high pressure that's going to build and lead to a quieter spell as we go through the rest of the week for southern areas. Further north and tightly packed isobars show that it's blustery, and we have a weather system that's going to push in as we go through tonight and into Wednesday. Some heavy rain affecting particularly western parts of Scotland through the next 24 hours or so, but even some of that spreading further eastwards. We are going to see increasing amounts of cloud across parts of England and Wales, but in the east, where we have some clear skies, rural spots could just about dip into single figures. As we go through Wednesday then, a north-south split, quite cloudy and wet across many northern areas, particularly western, southwestern parts of Scotland. Here, rainfall totals could build up. There could be a little bit of localised flooding and also some disruption to travel. Further north across Scotland, it's going to be a showery day and also a few showers across parts of England and Wales, but also some bright sunny spells, and with winds a little bit lighter than they have been recently and temperatures getting to highs around 19-20, it should feel relatively warm. As we go through Thursday then, staying largely dry across more southeastern